Ashley, you're muted.
Sorry about that, everyone. Apologies. Let me just get situated here.
Rick, I don't have her up.
Okay, sorry everyone about that. Fundamentals for Startups is our regular lecture series open to anyone interested in learning about entrepreneurship or building a startup. Each week, we feature experts from various fields who bring you insights and inspiration. All sessions are recorded and archived on CoMotion's website. If you've joined us before, you know that CoMotion Labs is a multi-industry incubator program hosting early-stage startups from both inside and outside the meetup community. From critical infrastructure to learning, mentoring, and networking, CoMotion Labs is committed to nurturing and enabling startup success, and we do this without taking equity or IP. We operate out of 3 locations on campus, each with its own industry focus. Apologies again. Oh my. Sorry, everyone. Some technical difficulties today. We operate out of 3 locations on campus, each with its own industry focus: life sciences and hardware in Fluke Hall, and technology in Startup Hall. So if you are a founder looking for somewhere to thrive, we'd love to talk to you. While we wait for everyone to join us, I'd like to make a few announcements. This quarter, we have been highlighting some successful recent graduates of our CoMotion Labs program. This is our last event of the quarter, but all of our talks are archived on our website. To view them, please visit the CoMotion Labs section of our website and click on the Fundamentals for Startups link. Today, Tom Harel of Routable will present how to build your first proof of concept. Tom Harel is the co-founder and CTO of Routable, where he leads the company's technical strategy and product development. He approaches every element of his role with a developer-first mindset, drawing from his personal experience and scaling business payments. Tom's been interested in computers since before he could even walk and is a self-taught developer with over 2 decades of coding experience. He previously served as a software engineer and data scientist at Yelp and EAT24. Tom earned his BA in economics from the University of California, Berkeley, where he focused on statistical methods and Econometrics. Tom will take all questions via the YouTube chat, so feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. And I'll now turn it over to Tom.
Thanks very much, Ashley, and hello everyone, and welcome to our chat today. I'm very excited to be here and talk to you all about building your first proof of concept. Just a quick side note, in order to keep things short and simple, I'll use the term POC to refer to proof of concept in the slides and voiceover to follow. So alrighty, today we'll be talking about a few things. What is a POC and why should we build it? This is probably a little self-explanatory, but we'll talk a bit about what a POC is and why it's important. Next, we'll talk about what should we include in our proof of concept or POC. We'll get into some specific of what our POC should include, or more candidly, what can we exclude. Third, we'll talk about how to validate a proof of concept. We'll chat about what to do in your newly minted POC. Who do you show it to and how to process feedback? Last, I'll talk a little bit about lessons learned from building Routable. I'll talk candidly about a few mistakes that my co-founder and I made at our POC stage and how they ended up hurting and in some ways accelerating our business. Last, as Ashley mentioned, we'll have a Q&A section where I'll answer, I'll at least try to, any of your questions. All right, let's get started. What is a POC and should we even build it? What is a POC? A POC, or proof of concept, is the first presentation. I intentionally put that in quotes because I don't actually mean a slideshow, but the first inkling of a product, which should prove its feasibility. The type of proof of concept you might create depends on the product and industry you'll be operating in. But in this discussion, we'll be talking about building an actual working prototype as your POC for your application or product. Building a good POC will require investment in the form of time, resources, and energy. It sometimes will require more than one person, and in some cases, a fully functional team. So why do it at all? Why can't we just invest all the time and energy in building the full mature product that we'll end up sending out to the world? As you can see in the picture here, if somebody tried to sell that contraption on the right or to yours on the left, that might not have gone so well. So we build a POC because creating one, you will get the first reaction from potential investor customers and or industry experts. It will kickstart your journey to learning whether your idea is actually worth anything. This, in turn, will tell you if you should keep investing your time and money in it, or should you pivot to work on something else. Remember, it's always better to fail fast. Your POC is probably the first real test your idea is going to have. Creating a POC is far cheaper and less time-consuming than building a more mature product. In other words, if your idea is doomed to fail, it's better to find out sooner with minimal investment. For this section, we conclude that the POC is the smallest product offering we can build that will help us understand whether it has a future or is doomed to fail. There's no cut and dry set of rules that will tell us exactly what to build, but we can try our best to synthesize the core of our idea and put it to the test. Don't fear failure. It's part of the process and is a reasonable outcome at this stage. And as that picture shows on the side, fail your way to success. I know I failed quite a bit and continue to fail every day. I'll take you through a quick break and run a little thought experiment. If you're watching this recording, feel free to pause the next slide and read at your own pace. I'll walk you through it relatively quickly. In the next slide, we'll introduce 3 fictional founders who are taking different approaches to get their ideas to market. We'll see who you'll identify with. We have on the first one, we have Joe, the founder of Crano Software, the best construction crane operator efficiency software. Joe spent 50% of his life savings and 5 years to build a company. He's launching his product in the upcoming Crane Operation United conference in Las Vegas. Second, we have Emily, the founder of Eco Spider Traps, the world's most ecological spider traps. Emily is convinced that spiders are terrifying and humanity needs to catch them all, no pun intended, while remaining ecological. She's been working nights and weekends to build the trap of her dreams. Last, we have Jesse, founder of Cats R Us, the most complete cat-human wearable device suite. Jessie is ideating whether we can create a better human-cat connection by introducing cross-species wearables. She has interviewed dozens of cat owners and creating a product that allows humans to read their cat's emotions. I know as a 3-cat owner, I definitely want something like that. But joking aside, let's talk through these options real quick. Joe, while he creates something that's huge and potentially very meaningful, is shooting in the dark. He doesn't really know, at least according to the synthesis, whether his idea makes sense at all. He might make it big, but most likely he just spent 5 years and half of his life savings to be disappointed. He didn't test this idea, nor did he talk to anyone. While he could still be successful, the likelihood of that is fairly low. Emily thinks she has a good product to offer the world. She has set out to build a trap of her dreams, instead of something simple and testing and iterating. Moreover, she hypothesizes that other people view the world as she does, which might be right. I know I'm terrified of spiders. But without some more information, she, much like Joe, is shooting in the dark. Jessie, on the other hand, is a little more humble. She has an idea, which might make half of you cringe, for those who are not cat people, but the other half would be excited to try it. She's also trying to achieve something simple and small with her first product, her proof of concept. She has a hypothesis about people's desire to connect better with their cats and is trying to build the smallest product to test her hypothesis. If her fully fleshed out idea is a suite of wearables and devices, she's just going to focus on creating the one thing that she can right now to try to prove an hypothesis and have an inkling towards whether that's something that people actually want. Okay, now that we've talked about what a POC is and had some fun with fictional founders, let's dive deeper into what our POC should include or more so exclude. Just how minimal can it be? We've now talked about the importance of a POC and what purposes does it serve. And I'll reiterate, that is to evaluate whether an idea is worth pursuing and investing in or not. But the million-dollar question is just how small or minimal can it be? We want it to be as simple as possible, but to still allow us to gain insight into the probability that what we have is a golden egg. In other words, we're trying to gain insight into whether what we're going to be building is worth the time and effort or not. The biggest challenge we have as entrepreneurs who want to conquer or change the world with our amazing ideas is to distill them down to their core. This seems like a simple feat for folks who haven't gone through this exercise, but it's actually quite difficult. Remember that our goal here is to build the smallest application or product possible that will allow us to gauge the investment and customer interest. Every business is slightly different, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to this. My approach has always been to map my ideal product and work my way backwards and try to trim as much as I can without hurting the potential knowledge that I'll be gaining. In other words, it's to start by building a web of all features and offerings you can dream of and start paring it down. If we think about it in software development and versioning, you have your V0, which is your very first iteration, all the way down to your nth version of your product. You need to launch, or sorry, not to launch, but you need to hypothesize whether this VN actually makes sense by trimming and going backwards to your V0. This will help guide us through what's absolutely necessary to build in our proof of concept. We'll need to be honest with ourselves about what we really believe is absolutely necessary. If we go back to Jessie's example from before, she set out to build the most complete cat-human wearable device suite. Well, her goal was to create a suite of wearables, that is, multiple devices, to connect cats and humans. She has chosen us to build one device first and test it. This is probably the most minimal product she can build in order to figure out whether her business is valid. In Routable example, and I'll take a pause here real quick to explain slightly about what Routable is or what Routable does for folks who don't know what their business is. In essence, our application is an application that allows businesses to transact, that is, to pay and get paid by other businesses. Kind of a Venmo for business, if you will. In our example, my co-founder and I set to build two things. We decided that in order to prove our idea, we just need to know two things. One, are vendors willing to accept and pay via an online portal? So that's the first bullet point you see. We built a landing page for our clients and vendors to elect how to get paid. The second piece was to make sure that our clients actually see that their vendors are getting paid or their customers are paying them. So we built kind of a dashboard page that showed the list of payments. That's it. There was no way to really create payments. We did that manually with our client behind the scenes, which took place at Startup Hall, and it was a very fun exercise, stressful, but exciting. I want to take a caveat and to make a side note here that while those two pages are a little bit of oversimplification, because we created the flows in which the consumer or the client sees things. But there's some work behind the scene that we need to do to actually move the money. And it wasn't as simple as I make it sound. So while there are two things that we actually built to gauge the impact, there was some back-end work that we needed to do in order to actually enable our product. I had more comment that our dashboard was really just a list page. It wasn't sophisticated, it wasn't crazy, it was very minimalistic. It showed who's getting paid for what and what status the funds are in. Are they in transit? Are funds moved? Is it waiting a vendor to register? That's it. There were no actions to take. It was very, very, very slim and trimmed down. So our conclusion for this section is, as the picture says, simplify. Each business is different, and it's going to be hard to say what yours might need. But we wear up the trap to build everything that will most likely end in your failure to deliver something fast and iterate. You need something that you can quickly test and iterate on. You don't need it to be beautiful. You don't need it to be 100% bug-free. It should be good enough to showcase your idea and its potential. Another caveat here, and that is very industry dependent or specific, in the case of us moving money, that part needed to be bug-free, right? We can't have funds go from one place to another that they were not intended to. But if our dashboard has a hiccup or if our font doesn't look the best, that's not that big of a deal. Our clients would tell us about that and we'll figure out that's something that we need to fix. How do we validate a proof of concept? We think we have something and build it quickly. Now what? Who needs validation? Validation is a critical piece of the proof of concept process. After you build your initial product, you'll need to get feedback from investors, potential customers, and industry experts. This will be the first inkling that will guide you whether to pursue this idea further. I'll split this section into three parts: investors, potential customers or clients, and industry experts. Let's talk about investors first. Investors are an important piece in today's startup ecosystem. Not all investors are created equal. Some investors are well known, like Andreessen Horowitz or A16Z. Others are less reputable. The reputation of an investor matters, but it's not everything. There are wonderful investors who might know your industry better than the hottest names in Silicon Valley. In our case, it was definitely true. It's important to talk to a few investors and not get discouraged by negative reaction. I'm sure anyone who has pitched to investors got rejected at least once. It happens, it's the way the cookie crumbles, and we all need to get used to that. Not every investor will understand your business, and that's okay. Take their reaction with a grain of salt, as they only try to evaluate if you're a fit to their portfolio, their experiences, and their industry knowledge. They might not fully understand what you're trying to do. Do note that there are plenty of examples of wonderful companies that have been rejected by investors and still made it. I was lucky enough to be part of one called EAT24. It was a great business that no investors wanted to fund, and it sold for over 140 million bucks. Not all hope is lost if investors give you the cold shoulder. Remember, it's just one data point. If you see the picture on the side that I put, it's at one of our billboards for EAT24 about 3 weeks before it got acquired by Yelp for $140 million. If If you read the caption, it pretty much identifies exactly the culture that we said at EAT24, like ordering food online, but not terrible. We just joked our way around it and made the best product we could. Okay, second, we'll talk about validation from potential customers. This is probably the most important validation to get, although it might also be the hardest one to come by. Finding and identifying the correct potential customer for your business might sound easy, but it actually might be very difficult to identify the actual buyer persona, reach them, and engage in meaningful conversations that would be productive for you. This is very industry specific. It depends if you're selling a B2B business or you're a B2C or a B2B2C, if you're a marketplace, if you're a retail, like there's so many different ways in which potential customers might map out for you. If you're lucky enough to find folks that you think would be good potential customers, show them your POC and get their raw feedback. If you can, start talking about their willingness to pay for your service or product. It will give you an even clearer insight into the feasibility of your idea to make it as a for-profit business. This might be also misleading in some sense, and it really depends how early or how small the POC is, right? In our example, Routable, if I showed my potential customer that I have a landing page and a list page, they might not really want to pay for it. But if you paint them the picture and tell them the story about this is the first thing, and here's how we're going to grow it, and here's what we're going to do, and here's all the value that we're going to create for you, that might be a result in a different conversation. Third, we'll talk about validation from industry experts. This last type of validation you might want to seek from folks who are knowledgeable about the industry you're trying to break into. They may be working at companies in adjacent spaces, work for competitors, or individuals with academic experience that is relevant for what you're trying to accomplish. For us at Routable, there were a few folks that we talked to in banking. There were a few folks we talked to in payments, who are payments consulting agencies. There are folks that we talked to that sold companies to a competitor. There are many, many, many ways to get insight from industry experts. When talking to folks from this category, be mindful of actual competitors. They might steal your idea and have teams in place to implement your ideas quickly. There's no hard and fast rule how to ensure this won't happen, but if you're mindful about who you're talking to and have a decent connection to them, you should be fine. Lastly here, beware that folks who fall into this category are not necessarily startup people. They're usually experts that work for a large corporation or with great academic knowledge. They might not understand how to start a business and fail to see the value in your POC when compared to your vision. I'll share a personal experience about this later on. In conclusion here, after building our POC, we need to get feedback from trusted sources to evaluate what we've created, whether what we've created is deemed valuable. This validation is what will give us conviction to continue investing time, energy, and resources to pursue our idea further. The feedback we'll get will also guide us as we iterate on our POC. But remember, negative feedback is not necessarily a bad thing. It really depends what people are saying. If everyone's saying there's no freaking way this thing will work, that's probably a good sign that you need to pivot or change something. But if you get feedback that tells you that, oh, you'll need to add this feature or that feature, or you'll need to change something in some way, shape, or form, it's actually potentially quite productive and is a good piece of feedback. And while it's negative in nature, it doesn't actually mean that what you're doing isn't valuable. It's just giving you more and more ideas on how to improve and how to build your business in a better way. I'll take a few minutes here and share some potential experience with y'all. My co-founder Omri and I built the POC for Routable during our time in YC, which was definitely quick and dirty, as I mentioned, and if I have to be honest, quite stressful. We definitely made several mistakes at this stage, and I'll run you through a couple of those in the next couple slides. Mistakes we made at Routable round one. When my co-founder and I started ideating about what will later become Routable, we made several mistakes. The biggest one by far is a result of feedback we received from an industry expert about our POC. So at that point, Omri and I built those 2 landing pages that I told you about, which were very minimalistic, very simplistic. We went to a wonderful lady that worked at a very world-renowned payment agency that we got connected to through a friend in the network. And she told us that she thought that there was very little value in introducing a new AP stands for accounts payable product that cannot also do accounts receivable. Her stance was that there are a bunch of legacy AP products out there. Sale.com is a great example. Coupa is a different example. And there are different AR products like Zuora and a few others. But she said that given that payables, so money that me as a company is paying my vendors, and receivables, money I'm collecting from my customers, is very simple in the sense that it's money flowing one way or another. It would be great if there was one product that did it all. And we took that to heart. But as I'll explain here in a second, there's a problem with that. Well, it definitely seemed like a great idea and still is to some extent. It set us on a trajectory to try to solve 2 different problems at the same time. While AP and AR sound like a very simple, just reverse the product, right? So instead of sending money, you're collecting. There are a lot of nuances from very different areas in the product that change given the flow of funds. One specific example is your fraud concerns are different, right? When I onboard a customer or a client, it's a large company, I run them through what's known as a KYC, know your customer, or KYB, know your business flow. That's a very specific flow. It goes through a few stages. You verify the entity, you verify its members. It's very well documented flow in the industry. It takes a few days, and we go through and acknowledge that who we're talking to is actually a reputable business. On the other end, if you're collecting money from folks, you can't take them through that excruciating onboarding flow. They just won't do it, right? Their incentive is they're not technically a client of mine or prerogatives, and their incentive is they just want to pay the business that they need to pay. So that's just one example. There are many examples of how AP and R sound like very simple, just reverse the flow of funds, but really there are many, many, many nuances into why they're not the same product and not very easy to just connect the two. So for us, we lost the focus we initially had and spread our attention into 2 problems. It caused us to slow down and lose our momentum. My message to you here, as the lesson states at the bottom, is solve a single problem. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. Don't try to solve all the problems in the world. Focus on just the one problem that makes your business great. Mistakes we made in Routable round 2. When we interviewed a potential customer about our POC, we were not accurately defining the market segment we wanted to solve for. Our idea has always been to solve the mass AP problem at scale. But when we ended up interviewing folks, we ended up with a bunch of small businesses in our potential customer pool. We interviewed them and got feedback. This, in turn, guided us to build some flows incorrectly and not stay true to our core mission, which again is the mass AP product building and AP solution for larger enterprises at scale. We got some great feedback, don't get me wrong, and it was good and productive, but in some areas it missed the mark for who we're solving for. We ended up building features that will benefit an SMB, but not really a huge fit for large-scale enterprises. One in particular that I remember from very early days is that we hypothesized that people wanted to look at payments in like kind of a card view. Like if you think of that traditional list view, you click on it and it opens into a card, which my co-founder made beautiful designs. It was great. It looked stellar. It was amazing. But then we talked to our customers, or there was potential customers that I mentioned, the smaller guys, and they were very happy with it. They thought it was great. But as we move up market, we started to realize, hey, these folks have thousands and thousands and thousands of payments. There's so many cards I can fit on a screen. That's not going to work. So we needed to change our gears and figure out a better way to solve that problem. We ended up with quite a different view and quite a different page for that part of the product. So here we took advice from folks who are not really our target segment, and it ended up wasting a little bit of time and building the wrong thing. The lesson here is really know who your customer is and understand what the problem that you're trying to solve is. Again, as I just stated, you get feedback, and it's very, very, very valuable. Be mindful that it's not always going to be 100% accurate for you to act on, as in take that with a grain of salt. Don't get me wrong. If no one likes your POC, you might want to look for a different idea. But stay true to your mission. You know it best. And always ideate, build, collect feedback, and iterate. As the image says, wake up, kick ass, be kind, repeat. I'll leave you with one quote before we go into Q&A from Hugh Huston, who is the founder of Dropbox. A very powerful quote, very short. Don't worry about failure. You only have to be right once. I love this. It's very simple, elegant, but super, super powerful. Failure is a part of the process and is a part of our human existence, and we need to know how to deal with it in the best way we can. And for us in the startup community, building something great, we fail all the time. We just need to get it right that one time and move on to the next time. With that, I would love to thank all of you for your time, and thank you for hanging out with me. I know that we have a bunch of questions, Ashley and team, that are coming my way, and I'll try my best to answer everything to the best of my abilities.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I guess we'll kick off with something from the chat. How do you balance out the need to ship a product or proof of concept to market with limited resources available?
Yeah, that's quite the million-dollar question, right? It's tough. There is no right or wrong answer to this, and there is no one way to ensure that what you'll do will be successful. The best thing you can do is to really identify what is the core of the problem you're trying to solve and trim down the proof of concept as much as you can. As engineers, and I'll speak to someone here in the audience and bore others, especially folks that come from like larger companies and larger corporations, we tend to build foundational work and build up on that. When you're building a POC, think about something you were most likely going to scrap most of, if not all of. So when you build, your code quality shouldn't matter too much. It just needs to work. It just needs to function. A lot of time and energy is wasted on building the most amazing thing where you don't even know if your idea makes sense. So my advice, trim it down, have a single, maybe two objectives you're trying to understand, or two hypotheses that you're trying to prove. Don't build it in a way that's like pretty and shiny and the best thing ever. As I said earlier, it just needs to work, right? And if it has a bug or a couple of funky flows, that's okay. You'll fix those later. Assuming your idea is good, people will like it anyway. So don't over-optimize. Be quick, be nimble, and be humble. I hope that answered the question.
I think it did. So what, in your opinion, are the biggest mistakes founders make when building their proof of concept?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no foreigner to mistakes. That's a great question. I think kind of like part of the last one is you're spending too much time in build mode without talking to external sources. So you have your idea, which is terrific. The best way to do it is to iterate on the quickest, low fidelity product you can build. I would start with a mock-up. Get a mock-up, build it, get some feedback on it. You're not going to be able to get fully fleshed out feedback from customers, but you'll be able to get inklings. So you would start there and show it to customers. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be the prettiest. Just need to function. And there are tools nowadays that make this process fairly easy. You can build with InVision or Figma, and you can build pretty functional mockups. So I would start with that. After you got some validation that what you're doing makes sense, and again, might be industry dependent, and some folks will be able to do this better than others. So for example, if you're building a hardware product, that's gonna be really difficult. But if you're building a website like Facebook or whatever social network, that might be much easier to do with a Figma or InVision. The second problem I see is people are trying to solve too many problems. Like I said about us with the AP and AR, focus on one problem that you're trying to solve. Trying to solve multiple problems will lead you to lose focus, and either your POC would take too long to go to market or to go get feedback and iterate on, or it'll just be hard to understand because you're solving all these problems with this very immature product. So solve one problem, do it well, understand what you're solving, get feedback, iterate, invest as little as possible while still being able to get insight. And I know it's easier said than done, right? Saying invest as little as possible but still be able to gain insight is wonderful, but it's really hard to do. And I do acknowledge that. And I think that there is no way to get it right out of the gate, and you will fail in that process and you will learn from those mistakes. And the next thing will be better, and the next iteration will be even better.
Great. You said that getting feedback is important, but gave an example of how you were hurt by listening to feedback. So how do you justify that?
Yeah, that's I need to think about that one a little bit. But I gave an example of one instance when we were hit by feedback. I did not mention the hundreds of instances where feedback was super, super valuable. I'll clue you all in a little secret. When Henri and I first met and we wanted to build Routable, what we had in mind was a virtual check product. That was our first hypothesis, that the world doesn't want to have paper checks anymore, so we're going to build virtual checks. We took that mock-up that we had in quite like a tiny POC that I wrote pretty much overnight to a guy named Randy, who ended up selling a company called CheckFree years and years ago. I don't remember, to FIS or some other large conglomerate. And we showed it to him, and his whole business was getting rid of checks. When we showed it to him, his first reaction was like, you're trying to solve a problem that's already solved and you're not creating enough value, which again is a negative reaction if you read it at face value, but we took it as a very positive reaction. It's like, okay, we missed the mark. That's okay. We're going to realign and figure out what it is that we're really trying to solve and how we're going to create value. So that's one instance where feedback was, slightly negative, and I may have been emotionally hurt by it, but as a business and as a team, we're able to build something that people want. And if we had launched that product to market, most likely we would not have been here today, and I would not be speaking to you. I can think of hundreds of other examples that were actually very, very beneficial, but that one was the one that resonated with me the most. And he crushed our hopes and dreams in like 3 sentences, which was, again, great. And we needed to have heard that before we did more investing into it.
Sure. So going back to some feedback, how do you go about soliciting feedback, and what are the best ways to connect with investors or industry experts or even potential customers?
Yeah, that's a great question and quite a large one. I'll break it into those 3 different personas, because the ways to reach them might be similar, but in some senses different. Investors are either really easy to reach if you have in-network folks that you know who are in VC or you've worked with them before, and it's very easy. But if you're new to the startup ecosystem and you're trying to break into the investment network, that might be really difficult. There's this like old, I don't know how many years old story about the elevator pitch, and why an elevator pitch is called an elevator pitch, because people used to find investors, corner them in elevators and try to pitch them in a sentence, right? That's how that old I don't know if that's a tale or if that's actually real thing happened. I don't think that's very beneficial. I think what you need to do in order to reach investors is build a network and understand and research the investors, understanding who would actually be interested in learning what you're talking about. When Omri and I set to build our little investor CRM, we looked at folks with payments background. We particularly started to look at angels that have a payments background, either folks like this Randy character that I was telling you about, who had sold the business and now does some angel investing on the side, or other folks who are worked in different businesses and has a payment knowledge. One of our investors who's been great is a wonderful guy called Gokul Rajaram, who I love working with. He did payments in quite different companies. DoorDash is one of them and others, but he understands what payments is, and going to him was way more beneficial for us from going to somebody like, say, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, who might be a super intelligent guy, but doesn't necessarily have the interest and know-how, or maybe both, about what we're trying to build, or what we were trying to build back then. So look at folks and do your research. After you've done your research and you've got a short list maybe of folks that you want to talk to, angels are normally much easier to get in front of than VCs. VCs might be a little bit more difficult. You probably will meet some low-level partner or somebody who is an investor at a VC, and they may or may not like your idea, but they also normally don't have the decision-making power at a VC. So, but it's important to go talk to them. It's important to go understand your idea, understand the path that get your idea in front of them. The other thing I would say about talking to investors specifically is have kind of like a mini business plan in mind. If you just go talk to an investor and show them proof of concept and tell me you want to raise money, it's like going to the grocery store without a grocery list. It's cool, but like you won't be getting their full attention, and they might knock off a few points from you for not having that idea of a business. And how are you going to take our money and 10x it or 20x it or 30x it? So have an idea on how your business can actually make money, have an idea how much money you want to raise, and then go talk to them. In talking to industry experts, the process is somewhat similar. Again, you need to make a short list. You need to research and understand who you're talking to and who you're trying to talk to. And if you can get a warm intro through somebody in your network, that's probably the best. If you can, cold emailing works. I've cold emailed hundreds of folks, and I'd say the success rate it's been changing over time, and there's more. As our company grew, it obviously improved. But when it was just Omri and me shooting in the dark, I'd say we had still about a 30 to 40% success rate in getting people to respond to us, which is quite higher than I would think initially. We had emailed folks at banks. We'd emailed folks at consulting firms. We had emailed folks that work at large corporations. We had emailed folks that work at what would be our competitors. And almost half of them wanted to talk to us, even if it's to tell us that our idea is stupid and we shouldn't pursue it, but they were still willing to engage and either get coffee with us if we're in the same city, or would hop on a video call for like 10 to 30 minutes. So people are actually more willing to talk to than you would think, especially the folks who consider themselves industry experts and thought leaders. They love talking to you about what they know. The last is customers, and that's probably the hardest. Before, and again, as I said earlier in the slides, knowing who your customer is might be difficult, and it might also change over time. But talking to customers or potential customers before you actually have something to show them is hard. And unless you have an in-network connection, it might be very, very tough to get actual response onto cold emails. We've had lukewarm success doing that. We also added some, let's say, quirky stuff in our emails to make people open them. So we tried a bunch of different titles. We tried incentivizing folks with money, but that doesn't really work.
And generally speaking, when you try to incentivize folks with money, they probably just want, like, it's like a Halloween kid, right? They only want your candy. They don't really want to talk to you. So honestly, what worked the best is just casting as wide of a net as you can. And you won't get a huge or a ton of success necessarily, but if say you reach out to 1,000 people and you get 30 to come back to you, 3%, not a great success rate, but still you got to talk to 30 potential customers. So cast a wide net and try to get as many people in the door as you can.
Great. And this is sort of a follow-up. I'm going to try to decipher what the meaning was, but they may disagree. And I'm assuming they would be VCs and angels or others might influence the strategy of your business mission. And you and your co-founder might feel like you're losing control of your business with their opinions. So how do you think you should deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends what they in this context, and if they're already investors, if they're like a board member. There are many. I can take this question in many different ways. I'll take it in kind of like the harsher way, which is, let's say you have an investor that you're presenting this business to. They sign up as an investor, and at some point they're telling you, "Hey, this doesn't work out. You need to change your idea." It's tough. I'm happy to say that that really hasn't happened to me yet, but I can hypothesize how I might approach that. In the end, you're the expert on your business, not your investor. Your investor knows a lot about the market, it knows about trends in the industry. It can be they can be very useful when talking about what burn rate should we have, or who do I talk to about yet another feature that we want to build. They don't necessarily understand the core of your business. And feeling like you and your co-founder are losing control is definitely not a good feeling. And generally speaking, in conflict resolution, I would try to resolve that conflict in a positive way, and in maybe asking your investor for some more time to prove to them that what you actually want to build is the correct thing. It's going to be very, very difficult to have a negative investor on board in an early stage, as they will talk about your business to other potential investors. The investor ecosystem might seem large, but everybody knows everybody and they talk to each other. So I would do my best to mend relationship with that investor and win them over with win them over to your side and what you're trying to build. And in some senses and in some cases that doesn't work out. And either you just have a disgruntled investor and they just stay on your cap table until the next fundraise and maybe you can buy them out. Or yeah, I guess there's no really or you can get them to see the world in your way. I hope I answered the question. I'm sorry, it wasn't super clear to me what I was asking, so I went a little bit on a tangent.
And Asker, if you want to clarify in the chat, please do, and we'll go back to it. Another question from the chat: Is it a good idea to monetize early, or to try to scale, gain more recognition and value to make monetization phase easier?
Terrific question. And I would say that's one that's very industry specific and very product specific. So if we think about like Facebook as the example of the latter, right? They monetize way, way, way later in the game. It worked out well for Facebook. It did not work out well for other folks in the industry that tried, like MySpace tried to do the same thing, couldn't do it, and ended up not working well for them. My personal take is, again, it quite depends what you're doing, but my personal take, and maybe it's a little skewed by my B2B worldview, is that if somebody is not willing to pay for your product, they're not really your customer. They might be a fair weather customer that will use it because it's cool and it's shiny, but if you're not willing to like put their money where their mouth is, they're not really your customer, and you should not be building a product for them. So I would skew towards the monetize early. but it's such a specific industry, like such a specific product or industry question that is really hard to answer generally. There are examples to monetize early that benefited companies, and there are examples to not. So without knowing more, it's really hard to say. Personally, I'd like to see the dollar signs come in earlier than later.
Makes sense. Another one from the chat. How would you compare the idea of a minimum viable product to a proof of concept?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that the words MVP or minimum viable product, POC, proof of concept, and prototype kind of get entangled. And for what it's worth, I probably should have called mine a prototype rather than a proof of concept, given that I was talking about a fully fleshed out product where you can argue that proof of concept can be a drawing on a piece of paper or a mock-up or something else. So to me, a POC is like the littlest amount you can build to prove a hypothesis. And it could be via prototype, like we talked about today. It could be via a mock-up, or it could be via a napkin drawing. And if your hypothesis is whether I can get somebody to invest in my business that does this thing, and you show them a napkin drawing and they want to invest, then you've showed something, right? You've proved a concept. To me, an MVP is a little different. MVP is something you actually go to market with. It's not something that you need to, it's not a concept that you need to prove. It's a little after that stage. It's like, okay, you now know that you have something going on and this is what you want to pursue. And you launch with an MVP. So you launch with a minimum viable product. If we think about it, it might be easier to think about it as like an MVP feature, right? If you think about a feature to a product, let's say Facebook Marketplace, right? Everybody knows what that is, or at least I hope so. The MVP of Facebook Marketplace is different than what it is today. So they went through a concept stage, and then they got into the MVP stage where they actually launched something to market. They launched this thing. It kind of looked like Craigslist, but slightly in a Facebook way. It did what it meant to do, kind of have a classified section into Facebook. It's not what it is there, where you can do all these fancy filters and figure stuff out, right? And MVP is the minimum amount that you can actually go to what we internally call GA, general availability, with. It's not something that you show a little, little nooks and crannies to somebody, or it's not a napkin drawing. It's an actual product that works, that does what it's intended to do, but it's pared down versus what your maybe final version might look like. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah, absolutely. Another question from the chat: how much time should be given to get a proof of concept ready?
Terrific question, and that one is also super general, and it's going to be really hard to answer without knowing, right? Let's say you're building what I've been very interested in recently, modular nuclear reactors, right? If you're going to build a proof of concept, that's not going to be overnight. You're going to have to build something that has to have some safety requirements. It's going to have, sorry, if you're building a prototype for that, if you're building the POC, the napkin drawing, or a flow chart, or a mock, you can probably do that much quicker. But if what you're building is, say, a social app, you can probably knock out a proof of concept or a prototype fairly quickly. So I would say your proof of concept should take you as minimum time as possible that you'd still be able to answer your hypothesis. If it takes you 3 years and you're building a software application, you're probably doing it wrong. But it could take a few weeks to months to actually get something if you're building a prototype to prove your concept. If you're building a mock-up, I'd say it should be weeks or maybe a week if you can pare your product down. If you're building a hardware product, potentially much longer. I'm by no means an expert there, but I can see why that would take quite a bit more time.
Great. And I guess we're going to just pivot a little bit away from that and then talk more a little bit about the team that you and Henri have built. Can you share with us how you folks went on to choose the people on your team build? Any advice you can give about building your team and how many people are on your team currently?
Yeah, I man, our team changes every day. We're just hiring more and more people. I believe, to answer your last question first, we are at 165, give or take 3. So our team has changed. Actually, you met me when it was just me and Omri and in Startup Hall, so our team has grown quite exponentially over the last few years. But going back to the earlier part of the question, how do you choose your team? It's hard, and you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. But to me, what's been my guiding principle, at least in the very early stages, was I need to really like the people I work with. So obviously they need to be proficient. And if I'm hiring a software engineer, I need to make sure that I'm hiring somebody who actually knows what they're doing, right? And is not just going to hang out and send me emojis on Slack. They need to be able to prove their proficiency. But in an early stage team, and especially in an in-person team, which I don't know what's the norm nowadays after COVID, but in an in-person team, you're going to work together so many hours. You're going to be in each other's presence. You need to like each other, and that's going to be critical. Because if you're going to be in a situation where drama and politics and all that stuff starts to brew in early stage, A, you might not want to continue doing what you're doing, and B, you're going to set a pretty toxic culture moving forward. So to me, love the people you're working with. Be willing and able to spend as many hours in the day as you can with them. Kind of like selecting a partner, right? I love my wife and I can spend infinite hours with her. I'm sure I'm pissing her off all the time, but we can still resolve conflict together and come together. And it was very important to me, honestly, in choosing Omri as my co-founder, that we can have somewhat of the same relationship. And he might, hit me in the head for saying this out loud, but when we met, I made him take a personality test to make sure that we're going to jibe. And I was very worried that I'm going to go down a path of building something with somebody who I don't know, and that we might conflict later on. And I got to say, it's been an amazing experience. He even officiated my wedding, so you guys can understand how much I like him. And more of the team that we've built, I've loved pretty much everybody that I've ever worked with at Routable. And this has been a must-have for me. I cannot work and go as hard as I can with people that I don't enjoy spending time with. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but I wanted to make sure I get the message across. In terms of kind of structuring teams, that's changing at every stage of the business, and it's somewhat relevant to what you're doing. A hardware team might be different than a software team, and you got to structure them differently. But be humble and know what you're good at and where you have deficiencies. So for us, Omri was a really good designer, so we could limp along with a bunch of software engineers, him doing a few designs in the early stage, and we didn't necessarily need to bring a designer. I was pretty decent at engineering, so it was easier for me to hire more and more people. But my motto on hiring engineers specifically is I'm always hiring people that are smarter than me, and I hired so many of those. It's been a terrific and humbling experience to see just how much other people are better than me, and that was terrific, and I'm still very happy that I get to be in this position. So don't be afraid to hire people that you think are better than you. It does not mean anything negative about you. It's actually a really good sign that somebody who you think is smarter, better, whatever the metric is actually willing to work with you. I'll say one more thing about team. Scaling teams is hard. Going from a core group of founders to a very small, say up to 10 folks, that's easier. But as you start bloating the team, I don't necessarily mean it in a negative sense, but as you start expanding and growing the team, you're going to start having a little bit of more conflict in between people. So a little bit of politics will start brewing. It's important to have your eyes set on that and understand what you're willing to have and what you're not. It's to make sure that you keep the culture as positive as you can be. And maybe you'll find something about yourself that you need to change. I sure know I have. And that is good. I've definitely grown and learned things about my personal life and my behavior from my teammates, and I'm a much better person for it.
Awesome. So I've known you and Omri for some time now, and Omri has been with Startup Hall to some degree for many years, as he was a Techstars alum. Could you folks talk about some of the benefits you've had with being at CoMotion Labs?
Yeah, I mean, outside of the fact that, I enjoyed talking to you at Startup Hall, it's been a great experience, and it's really a wonderful place to kind of come together and build. I've been in the Pacific Northwest and Seattle specifically for 5 years. And each of those years I spent, I'd say, half my time, if not more, at Startup Hall. So just feeling the energy, getting to know people. I've connected with a few, we talk about industry experts, potential customers, and investors. I got all three from, at least one in all three categories, from just being there and talking to people and getting to know people. So as a networking multiplier, it's been great. As a workplace for me to come get my stuff done, that's on one hand affordable, but also allows me to have the space I need to do meetings and talk to people, and also have my focus time and get stuff done. It was really great. So I'm very thankful for the opportunity and the ability to use the space. I've not gone through Techstars, so it's going to be hard for me to talk about that, but I've done YC, which I think is similar, and that's been very, very beneficial in terms of network and in terms of the ideas and all the wonderful energy that is in there.
Awesome. I think I have time for just one more, and this seems to be a popular one. I've sort of lost it. 1 second. Okay, it is, what other piece of advice do you have for founders starting up in uncertain economic times?
Oof, yeah, I mean, as you also in the early setup presentation, I'm an econ nerd as well as a computer nerd. So for folks starting up now in these uncertain times, it's actually a good thing. It's a good thing for a few reasons. One, investors are much more eager to funnel money into early stage than they are into later stage. So you have all these investors that have raised a lot of funds and are much more interested in putting in money earlier than later stage. So for you, that's a benefit. It's also a benefit to see all those, and benefit to you, sad to others, to see all the folks that are being laid off. So there's a lot of talent out there. This is grade A, top level talent that you don't have to compete as hard for as you would have last year, right? I don't know if any one of you tried to hire people last year. It was a bloodbath. It was very, very hard to hire. You would have to pay so much money to recruiters, and it was just really difficult. And while it is sad to see people being laid off from great companies like Stripe or Chime or others, these are top-notch folks. These are folks who have, in some ways, done what you're doing, and you can probably hire them much easier nowadays. The last thing I would say is that there's no safe haven, right? Even working at a huge company like Stripe, people might get laid off, and working at a startup seems risky, but it's not that much more risky now that other companies are also trimming down. So the personal risk to you is lowered by virtue of the market trending a little sour. And I'll throw in one piece of advice that's unsolicited, and maybe it's valuable, maybe it's not, but valuations have also kind of come down from the height in 2021. That might seem like a bad thing, like maybe you're selling more of your business outright, but it's also a good thing. You definitely don't want to be in the opposite position of just have raised funds at a multiple on a valuation you can actually achieve for your next round. So be humble. What you're selling at early stage is practically feathers. It's okay to dilute. It's okay to raise money at lower valuation that you thought you can get last year.
Great. Thank you for that. And that is all we have time for today. Thank you all for joining us, and a big thank you to Tom for sharing his wisdom and experience with the group. As a reminder, today is our last talk until January, so watch your email And we'll be sending you some pings soon about future talks. So bye, everyone.